So good morning, good afternoon and good evening everyone, and thank you very much for being with us today for this webinar on the preparedness cycle for wildlife emergency response. My name is Paul Kelway and I'm the Wildlife Preparedness and Response Manager here at OSRL. As I said before, you're very welcome today. Please make sure you just stay on mute during the session and keep your videos off, just to help us with connection speeds. That would be really appreciated. So in November 2019, IPECA hosted a first dedicated industry workshop on wildlife response preparedness in Nicosia in Cyprus. That workshop was designed and facilitated by Sea Alarm, along with other partners from the Global Wildlife Response System, or GWRS project, and also with oversight from an industry steering group. And over the course of 3 days, the IPECA and OSRL members that were there actively explored the past, the present, and also the desired future regarding wildlife response preparedness. Through tabletops and group exercises, a series of recommendations were developed during that workshop for future actions to implement tiered preparedness for wildlife response as described in IPECA's 2014 Good Practice Guide. That set of recommendations essentially provides a roadmap for implementing wildlife response preparedness over the coming years and was summarized and illustrated as a preparedness wheel, a concept that was developed by Sea Alarm and the industry steering group for the purposes of the event. Today's webinar is going to provide an overview of the preparedness recommendations from that workshop and an introduction to the preparedness wheel concept that was developed. We're then going to use real-world case studies to illustrate how this process has been used and applied in a variety of country and regional contexts. Hopefully through that process, we're going to encourage a wider adoption of this good practice approach amongst our members in terms of implementing wildlife response preparedness, and hopefully today we can also create just a really nice opportunity for sharing knowledge and experience across our members and hopefully stimulating some good discussion on the topic as well. We have 4 speakers today in what, as I said, is a 90-minute session. So first off, Hugo Nijkamp, General Manager at Sea Alarm, will be providing an overview of IPECA's Wildlife Response Preparedness Workshop and also to introduce the preparedness wheel concept. We'll then move into 3 preparedness case studies from 3 different regions, each focusing on a different aspect of that wheel and of that preparedness process. So we'll start off with Wan Nasiruddin, or Nasir, from Petronas. He's the oil spill management manager there. And he will be providing an overview of wildlife response planning efforts in Malaysia up to today. Then Chidem Guvachin Orhan, the Crisis and Continuity Management Manager for BP Europe, or BP Southern Europe, will present on BP's wildlife response preparedness efforts in Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, with a main focus on the development of local wildlife response capability in Azerbaijan. And then finally, Barbara Capigiani, a biologist at Petrobras, will introduce their multi-year preparedness efforts in Brazil to develop an wildlife care network. At the end, we'll move into a Q&A session, so there will be plenty of opportunity for questions and discussions at that point. So yeah, please stick around for that. But first, I'll hand over to Hugo to introduce that preparedness process. Hugo, over to you, and again, just a reminder, if you're not presenting, just please make sure your camera is off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Hope everybody can hear this, and let me see if I can start moving the screen. Yes, I can. So, yeah, hello everyone. I'm going to present this Cyprus preparedness wheel, and that has been developed to provide a more easy concept for planning and building preparedness by industry members of OSRL, but also in general for governments. What will I present? So the preparedness wheel, as you see here, is a tool that we developed for that purposes. Well, just a very quick introduction. The purple part of the wheel is actually a first phase that everybody needs to go into to assess and developing a plan, so assess the risks. And then the second phase, if you want, is a multi-year investment into making that preparedness work. And that will actually develop that capacity over time. So that's a very short summary. I will go into the details of the wheel. But the wheel has been developed taking the IPCA guide as a lead document. And in that guide, you find a more complex diagram that actually tries to say the same. So this is basically a simplified, if you want, representation of this more complex figure. And this also allows you to, to make it more operational, what you want to do in your preparedness program. So the wheel was developed for the Cyprus workshop that we held in November. And at that workshop, as Paul said, there was a very nice representation from the oil industry. Many people that were really had also some backgrounds in wildlife response, and so collectively preparedness was discussed. And part of the workshop was also to take everybody through an exercise really simulating a spill for everybody, just to explore what are the challenges in such an event if you really start from scratch. On day zero, there's the spill, and what can happen with wildlife in the days that follow. And everybody through that exercise understood the importance of preparedness. And also in the another workshop explored the wheel as a tool to develop that preparedness, and that was considered as a very useful way of working systematically. So going through the wheel in that first phase where you try to develop a plan, it's the sectors A, B, C that you would go through, and I go through them one by one. So sector A in the wheel is the rationale and objective. So it's really to think about, from your perspective as an oil company, why would I plan for wildlife? And so you need to be aware of your potential pollution risk in the first place, and also to be aware of what could happen in such a spill if marine wildlife is near to the incident and is near to where the oil could go to. And so you have to be aware of that risk to marine wildlife, and also be aware that that provides another risk to your, if you want, reputation. Also as a company, you don't want to see your oil basically being spilled in the first place, but also not that vulnerable wildlife is being impacted. And so the awareness that also that impacted wildlife could be part of a public campaign or media. It's also important that at the moment that it happens, that you have something in place to demonstrate that you are prepared and can deal with those things. So it's that rationale and objectives that starts from your company to say, well, let's move into that planning. Let's see what we need. And that takes you to an assessment, which we recommend is taken care of by, consultants or experts that actually know, that can interpret scenarios of oil spills, but also look at the whereabouts of the marine wildlife in the area where that spill could go to. And so you would look at all kind of things like what are the risks. It could be a shipping, your oil being shipped, for instance, and but also your offshore installations or even harbor installation that could be the source of a potential oil spill. What you want to do is to see where are the animals seasonally. You can put that into a diagram like this with all the months here, and where you know exactly in which months a spill would be having a larger impact. Then you also have to see, like, okay, if I have something like that, how would it impact potential arrivals of those animals along the shoreline, and how complicated is that shoreline to actually deal with those impacts. You would also look in how many animals could get affected. Is it a few tens or maybe a handful, or would it potentially be thousands? what kind of species are there, and in how many animals would they actually appear in such a spill. Then you also explore how you would set up your response geography, if you want to see how do I get the animals out of the beaches and into a facility. And that's where also the people come in. Who do you need to actually make that happen? Tier 1 responders first, very close to the incident, or Tier 3 responders that you have to mobilize from maybe an international resource that take also longer to mobilize. And all that information goes into your planning design. That has to be taken on board. And in your planning, you are going to think about, if you have basically identified those resources, like how do I make the assessment about, like, is this scenario going to lead into wildlife or not, to the mobilization of those resources. And so you can set it up in all kind of diagrams. You cannot read this on purpose, but it is just to remind you, like, okay, it would be good to schedule that out, also to schedule out how your wildlife branch would actually be formed. But that also goes into the planning, drafting, and there are all kind of things, or guidance, how you put your plan together. But that is really that conceptual approach where you can identify, okay, this is what I want to do, these resources I need, and these resources need to come to the table if there is a spill. And that actually concludes that first phase, that you have a written plan. And that's very much a written plan, call it a paper tiger. But the paper plan is nothing if you haven't implemented into something that actually works. So what you do in that next phase, resourcing, is actually look at who did you identify, how do they appear in the planning, how did you conceptualize those contributions. And then this phase is actually to make sure that all of these resources can come to the table. So that is really where you share your plan with those resources, with those entities. If you want, very important is the other local authorities that also understand what you try to do, making sure that licenses, etc., can be in place. So you're actually going to share your philosophy with those resources, making sure that everybody can mobilize, and that could involve the identification of equipment that you need to buy, contracts being signed with experts, etc. So that is that resourcing part. So if you have done that, and it can go hand in hand with the resources, but then you go really into that multi-year program where all these identified resources have to learn, if you want, what can they do, how should they do it, and how can they work together. And that is first of all looking into the equipment that is needed. Often you also need equipment for your exercises. So there is that investment into equipment where it comes from, and but that equipment, if you buy it and you store it, it needs to be maintained, and so there's all kind of aspects coming with that equipment. You would actually divide your equipment into Tier 1, Tier 2 equipment that is immediately available, and the Tier 3 international equipment that can come from further abroad. And all of that needs to be checked, annually maintained, annually checked for the readiness. And that is the way to operate it. I'm hearing some noise. I don't know where it comes from, but I will just continue. So the equipment is one of the key elements in your response preparedness. Very important next is training and exercises. That's where the people come in. People partly are hands-on, need to work with the equipment, have to work with each other. So there are different levels of involvement that everybody has, and so you want to provide those responders with training. It's very much function specific. It always consists about knowledge and theory, but also skill labs, and you would like to qualify the people based on maybe international qualifications, so that you know that they can perform. And here is a diagram from the IPICA guide, which just indicates the philosophy of training. You've got different levels of training, like from basic responders, like volunteer kind of people that very quickly are, you can train them very quickly. But if they stay around, you actually can move them up into more leading functions. And the idea of this diagram is that you also use your international resources to make that development of skills locally happen. And so exercise is then that next step that you will bring all these trained resources and equipment together in various events, opportunity where they can learn to work with each other, and that's the obvious things like tabletop things or workshop or field exercises, very importantly, and those exercises can also be very educational to also local authorities, local parties, to actually see it and then realize, oh my God, this is what we need to perform. So that multi-year approach is basically a programmatic, like a project approach, a program I would call it, where you actually dedicate a number of years. You can identify 3 years or 5 years program where you say, okay, this is how I will go about it. And that allows you to plan all kind of trainings and exercises on a schedule of, let's say, 5 years in this case, where you can also see the regularity or the frequency of various activities that you want to plan. And so anyone that wants to be part of such a program can actually anticipate the opportunities that would appear over time. So if I cannot make it this year, next year there's another opportunity. And that is actually the key of that programmatic approach. So over the years, you would then see that, you also create some kind of a community of people that know each other, that can work together, and that is actually giving you the feedback that something really is developing. If you are in such a multi-annual modus, very important is that you regularly evaluate, like what have we been doing so far? Did it work? What did we learn? Do we need to change things? And you would actually involve all the parties into that discussion, into that process. And it might mean that you have to maybe reschedule your planning process again. I mean, it could be that some entities have changed or they have changed, there's always reorganizations. And that might also lead for you to maybe rewrite your plan or sections of the plan. So it's based on new insights that you get from these evaluations, and you would actually be better aware of where your plan is successful and where you may want to modify the plan and maybe change your strategy slightly. So going through such a wheel year after year, so you've done your planning, you have started your multi-year progress, then over the years you should actually see that your preparedness is building up. And with that building of preparedness, you should also see that the quality of your risk management goes up. So you would be comforted that also in those early days of a spill and a wildlife impact, you have actually resources that actually can perform, and that your whole strategy can come into place, that doesn't leave, let's say, a vacuum where nobody is doing something when animals get oiled ashore, and because that would leave you with empty hands. So this is how the wheel is working, and it really needs to turn, as you see. And so in conclusion, the wheel is a guide to capacity building, and it's really set up in a way that, logically it builds up on a previous process. But once you've gone through all the sectors, then it starts turning. Here in the middle, there's also project management, especially if you have a multi-year approach, that needs to be a program that is managed. So there needs also to be that management aspect to be taken care of. And as I said, multi-year investments will pay off, and that also concludes the the presentation, and maybe is also an introduction to the case studies that we're going to look into now. So I'll hand over to Nasir from here. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Hugo. So on that note, I'll be sharing some of the case study that we had in Malaysia. So first of all, very good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of participants joining in from all over the world. My name is Wan Nasruddin, or you can call me Nasir. So I'll be touching in some of the areas of our journey that we took when it comes to oil wildlife preparedness in Malaysia. So before that, I just would like to just show a video of my last vacation. So during my vacation, I shot one. Actually, I saw this turtle actually swimming through underneath me. So I managed to capture that on camera. And a little bit on the turtle aspect of things. In the east coast of Malaysia, there are a lot of species of turtles, and I think the most common one, the green turtle or hawksbill, or we call it penyu kara or penyu agar. And I think the most famous one and become a mascot of a certain state is penyu belimbing, or we call it leatherback turtle. And this species is rarely seen nowadays. I mean, due to a lot of factors, plastic, global warming, and actually it's part of the local tradition to actually eat the egg. And to date, it's still not illegal, although there are some environmentalists pushing for that. And there is an ongoing pressure from WWF. So just to set a context of it, some of the background that we have in Malaysia. Malaysia waters is always exposed to various oil spill risks due to maritime activity. These are the ships, shipping lanes going from the west to the east side, and actually there are a lot of oil and gas industry in the region as well. And due to that nature, there are a lot of risks involved when it comes to oil spill. And Southeast Asia have one of the largest biodiversities and host to various endangered species of wildlife and marine mammals. And currently, we are working closely with various government agencies, organizations, relevant governments to develop national preparedness in this area. It's not like wildlife or environmental protection is not a focus previously. It's just that there is little or very much none in the area of oil wildlife response, right? So just to reiterate back what Hugo said earlier on, our journey is through ABC, meaning that we are still in the planning process. We are doing the rationale, some assessment, and developing our preparedness and plan, and quickly just test it out in some of the exercises or real emergencies. But it's still within the planning aspect of the tiered preparedness wheel. And just to show some of our journey that we started in 2019 when we had our National Oil Wildlife Contingency Plan workshop, and we raised the issue to our government. These are the aspects that the oil wildlife preparedness and response is very much non-existent in the current plan. And I think when I went for that workshop in Cyprus together with Hugo and Paul, and Barbara, we actually have some enlightenment of, what are the things that you should consider on, and how can we actually establish this, where is the references, and where can we start. So I think that gives us a lot of insights and overview. So we came back and we worked closely with the government agencies. I think initially they were asking, what is this all about? When we had that first meeting at our Department of Environment office, involving 13 wildlife and fisheries department all over the country. So we have 13 agencies that are part of this development. And I think towards the middle of it, we managed to produce a draft, and from that draft, we worked through a series of workshops. And from that workshop, we actually derived more or less a complete plan to begin with. And in 2021, we have a lot of webinars. We do a lot of guidelines development internally. And I initiated the Oil Wildlife Response Volunteer Program in our organization, and to be escalated to other oil and gas industry in Malaysia. We call wildlife volunteer is not really a volunteer per se, it's actually a responder program. But the name we cannot use responder because due to the nature of the law and the environmental protection law in Malaysia, that I mean, all of these animals must be handled by the relevant government agencies. So we'll be supporting the relevant government agencies to actually respond together with them, part of our national oil wildlife response plan. And moving forward, we will move slightly towards the next stage of the wheel. We will be doing a lot of exercises, establishing some resources in the country, working closely with our service provider, including Israel, and to actually have that preparedness elements, including having a dedicated equipment, trained personnel, as well as conducting sustainable yearly programs for that particular area. So we're working for the risk assessment as well as the assessment when it comes to wildlife risk impact on a certain location this year. So we hope that can be incorporated in our database, that we'll be using it towards 2022 and onwards. Right. So a little bit, I'll be touching a little bit on the content of our national plan. So this is the structure that we established. It's rather difficult when you have a government, government-led organization, multi-government led organization when it comes to emergency management. But we managed to pull it off with the agreement of these 13 agencies, and we will have this kind of setup for the Oil Wildlife Response Committee structure. So the coordinator, let me just quickly open the laser pointer. So we have the coordinator on top here. So depending on the area and depending on the species, the coordinator will actually base on the the lead agency will actually be based on that particular aspect. And the species team lead will be specific species team lead that are impacted in the oil spill incident, and the rest will be supporting through various functions: reconnaissance, hazing, care and processing group, as well as recovery and transport. So we have other agency on top of that 13 agency earlier, part of our national plan, that will also be supporting in actually driving this committee while responding to an wildlife incident. Yeah, so this is the lead agency that we had. So due to different nature and the location, the law, the local law that we had, so we had to actually list down all the relevant agencies that hold relevant regulations on the specific areas to actually lead on certain aspect. So this is some of the example that we had. So we have the leading agency from our wildlife department for the Peninsula of Malaysia. For Sabah and Sarawak, they will have their own respective agencies to lead, and the rest will be depending on the species that are impacted based on the nature of the incident itself. These are the key contents that we had. The content have undergo many revisions, and we decided that we're going to stick to this and test it out, and later if let's say we need to improve it further, then we will include other elements. And I think thanks to Paul actually assisted us on this development as well, part of putting in everything together that we had. And hopefully, I think it is workable for now, but hopefully it will work on a real big scale emergency when the times come. And last year we had one activation. It happened on the October of 2020. This is not our incident. This is not a Petronas incident, but we were called by the government agency. This is an unidentified spiller incident. Happened because you are located near the shipping lane, so there are a lot of oil spill that is not reported and not claimed by anyone happen in our waters. So this is one of them. But this is actually one of the worst that we had in couple years back because it reaches the shore and it actually impacted the mangrove at that particular area. So the incident happened in 12 October 2020, and there were reports that there is a sighting near Port Dickson area somewhere in the west coast of Malaysia, and the spill actually resulted in severe environmental damage, including flora and fauna. But during that incident, there is a local wildlife office nearby, which is near to our workshop that we conducted earlier, and they decided that why not we just test the plan as it is. So that's what we did, and we activated the response and managed to rescue and capture some of the wildlife in the area as seen on the screen. And actually part of this, it brings us some key improvements in the plan, especially on the process of activation, communications, and actually is actually in return it benefited us in terms of the planning and preparedness. Yeah. On top of that, we also initiated the All Wildlife Volunteer Program. So this is actually to gather the interested individuals that we're going to develop and train to become responders in the event of all wildlife incident. So knowing the government agencies, they have very limited resources, but they also need manpower to assist them when it comes to a larger scale operations, such as a major oil spill incident. So that's the objective. Basically, we want to have a group of volunteers among all the industry players in Malaysia, trained and ready to be deployed when it comes to any incident. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's all from my end. Yeah, that's the journey that we took, and we hope that we can further move moving forward. So I pass to my next presenter. Thank you very much.
Chidam, you just have to unmute.
Oops, sorry, I did. I was talking to myself, sorry. So thank you very much. That's a very good presentation. I think we need to learn each other. So at the end of the day, we are working for the one similar target to have this capability. And Hugo, thank you very much for your presentation as well. You more or less covered my presentation. So my name is Chidam. I'm working for BP for 15 years. Today I'm going to talk about our region and how the capability building project in Azerbaijan. So as I said, Hugo covered all of these, the wheel and steps and the philosophy behind it, and the steps very well. Of course, I'm not going to repeat them, but what I'm going to do, I will cover the step from step D to G in this case study, which I'm going to explain. So I'll start with our region, BP AGTR. We have 3 countries in our region: Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. You can from the guess this, yeah. From the maps, you can see the region, 3 countries. We have in this region, AGT region, we have offshore platforms, drilling units, subsea pipelines, over 3,000 kilometers export pipelines, oil and gas pipelines, terminals, pump station, and block valves. Why I'm talking about this, this slide gives a good idea to me what we need to do and why we need to have this capability ready to be used. Okay, I'm going to first talk about what we have today in the region as a wildlife response and rehabilitation capability. As I said, we have 3 countries, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. And in these 3 countries, we have more or less similar capability for wildlife response with some slight changes, which I'm going to talk about. In 3 countries, we have wildlife response plans currently, environmental and socioeconomic sensitivity maps and associated tools. It's a full package, has lots of tools. Local wildlife responder pools consist of veterinarians, ecologists, zoologists, professionals, I mean, and the wildlife rehabilitation, response and rehabilitation centers. So the difference comes from this part. In Azerbaijan, we have a mobile wildlife response and rehabilitation center owned and operated by BP Azerbaijan. In Georgia, we have there's a permanent wildlife response and rehabilitation center, which is also owned by BP, owned and operated by BP Georgia. And in Turkey, there are terrestrial and marine wildlife response and rehabilitation centers, which are owned and operated by universities and government. What we did in Turkey as BP, we did support these organizations, universities and governments, via our environmental investment program to increase their capability, to improve their capability, I should say. So. And now we count those centers as our resources as well. So yeah, this slide speaks about what we have today, but it also speaks about hidden a program. So this doesn't happen in one night. It, as Hugo explained very well, it needs resources, it needs time, it needs effort, it needs planning. So in this case study, I will explain how we did that in Azerbaijan. So it was 2013, and I wish I would have Hugo's presentation during that time. During that time, there was very good resources, but not that much as we have today. But it is happy to see that we exactly followed the same process to build this capacity in Azerbaijan and in region, I should say. So we started with assessment. It is always, I guess, it is always a struggling point, challenge for companies to just decide where to start and how to start. So what we did start with an assessment. We assessed the legal framework to understand what is required from the legislation standpoint. So what is required locally and internationally. We also used international good practices, good standards to adapt to our project. And then we started assessing the wildlife at risk to understand the scale and to actually shape it up. I mean, develop the project accordingly, I should say. So we used our worst case oil spill scenarios for this. And we did gap assessment against the required capability. We used a tiered approach response, which is level 1, 2, 3 for wildlife response. And as I said, local and international legislative requirements. We did gap assessment, what we had, what was needed, and what was required and what was needed to have a proper sufficient, let's say, fit for purpose capability in country, which also includes wildlife response plan. Then local responders. These are the main modules of, as Hugo explained, main modules of wildlife response preparedness. Local responders. So development of potential local responder pool throughout the engagement program, training and exercise program. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in following slides. And facility and equipment, fit for purpose, wildlife response and rehabilitation center and equipment accordingly. Why I point out the fit for purpose. Every country has different sensitivities, different coverages. So it is important to have a fit for purpose capability. So the same setup may not work everywhere perfectly. And test and improve. We can buy equipment, we can buy or build a center, but we need to test it, and we need to continuously improve it, improve the facility equipment, test facility and equipment, and local responders as well in our plannings. So this was the basis for our project. So the project in Azerbaijan, actually we started in 2013, but it was, I shouldn't say completed, but partially completed in 2018. The scope was building local wildlife response capability for level 1 to 3, with all aspects of wildlife response and rehabilitation for BP Azerbaijan operations. I also should say it was a countrywide, nationwide project. I will mention that. So we needed a target. So it's not realistic to have an endless capability, endless equipment, facility, scale. So we needed a target. And for this development of this project, we were supported by local and international professionals. We did the design together, and we did define the target also together. Targets about responders. For example, in this case, 50 responders in species, marine species, terrestrial species, birds. So for how many at least we should be ready for. And geographical coverage, you can see from this map, this is Azerbaijan, and you can see the geographical coverage we covered in this project, onshore, nearshore, and offshore operations in Azerbaijan, BP operations in Azerbaijan. Coastal areas also, coastal areas of Azerbaijan stretching from the border with Russia in the north and the border with Iran in the south. And approximately it is 750 kilometers length. On terrestrial, we covered all the our pipeline routes. We have 2 oil pipeline routes in about 500 kilometers. So in this project, we covered all the country operations. Equipment-wise, the equipment part was designed to cover both facility-related equipments and response-related equipment, considering the species in the country, their distribution, concentration, and potential response sites. So these are very crucial, and the professionals, international and local professionals, helped a lot to design this part. The main classification was for the equipment. Main classification was site assessment and collection, transportation, facility-related equipments, main tools, treatment, etc., transport and accommodation for the responders, health and safety-related equipments, administrative type equipments and services, water services, electrical power, heating, ventilation, etc. kind of equipments. So after we got these equipments, we stored them in 2 locations. One is in Baku. Let me show the map again. One is here in Baku for the easy access for any location, response location. And the other one is in one of our pump stations in the middle of our pipeline system. Its capacity is one third capacity of the primary base. And the local responder part. So it was it seemed as a most challenging part in this project, because in 2013, when we started this project, there was no one. And I was thinking, if something happened during that day, whom we could call and ask for help, support. So there are various type of species, and we had no one in hand actually. And we started researching the resources, expertise in the country. So we realized that there were many governmental and non-governmental organizations who are still dealing with this kind of with these subjects actually, for different species, different organizations and different capabilities. They had various kind of capabilities. So, but we also realized that they also were not aware of each other. I shouldn't say aware, but they were not engaged. So they were working silo, and we just realized that we also need to engage them for the countrywide resources pool. So we started with the after definition of all the organization, all potential organizations, big organizations, very small organizations, veterinarians. We engaged with them. We did many introductory meetings with them. So because we needed to explain them what is the aim here, what we are trying to do as a oil company. So one by one, we explained them what is the target, what is this project, why we're doing this, how we're planning to do that. And also we did visit their sites, their laboratories, their facilities, their sites, lots of various places we visited, just to understand what is the capacity out there locally. After that, we continued having workshops, trainings, and some exercises, tabletop exercises, deployment exercises with these people. The main purpose was the following actions. I mean, the purpose for those to make this continue, because yes, you can have meetings, you can have protocols, promises, talks, but they need to engage actually. So we need to continue working with them, talking with them, involve them, train them, and have exercise with them to make this continuous improvement. And thanks to this effort, now we have around 100 potential responders, professionals, as I said, veterinarians, ecologists, zoologists, kind of people to help us there. So as a company, we cannot, clearly, it's not the ideal way to have 100 people employed and just do whatever needs to be done. So these organizations and the professionals in these organizations, they were very cooperative. They were very excited. They excited more than us, actually, and they engaged with us and with the program very well. Now I'm proud to say that they continue engaging each other, and there's a capacity not only for BP operations in Azerbaijan, but for Azerbaijan country as well. And their government also appreciate that. So by this, I explained the main steps of the project and to show you actually how we came to this current capability part. That is it from my side. I guess we may have some questions at the end. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm handing over to Barbara.
And Barbara, you also need to unmute.
Okay, thank you, Sigden. Thank you, Paul. I will continue then. Can you listen to me? I think so. Okay. Well, I am Barbara. I work at Petrobras, and I will talk about our wildlife preparedness. Petrobras is an oil and gas company, Brazilian oil and gas company, and we built our wildlife response plan in some years, and I will try to tell you a little bit of this experience. I'll tell you about when it started, how is the wildlife care network structured now, how is the wildlife response plan, and what are the main challenges. Then, first of all, would like to show you our the Brazilian map, and to explain about where our activities are. I will point with the red line. I will talk a lot about the Santos Basin that is located on the southeast of Brazil. In this region, we have some of the most known cities like Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, but Petrobras has activities on other basins, those that are on green light, and I will talk about this our wildlife plan on some of them, especially in the southeast region of Brazil. Please keep in mind that our shoreline has more than 7,000 kilometers, and this is a kind of challenge to have a wildlife response plan. But well, in the year of 2012, the environmental agents called IBAMA, or just environmental agents to be easier, required a wildlife response plan for the activities that were being licensed in this region, in the Santos Basin. And was the first time Petrobras was required to do this plan, and we kind of learned how to do it by doing. And we of course we had the help of some specialized professionals and companies. Fortunately, we have this kind of professionals in Brazil, but a lot of the knowledge was built during this almost 10-year process. This wildlife response plan required by our environmental agents should identify and map the vulnerable and the priority species and areas to be protected from oil spill. Should identify and provide facilities where the oiled wildlife could be managed and rehabilitated, and should identify and provide professionals able to rescue, manage, and rehabilitate wildlife. We started doing it in 2013, initially by our own resources with our own professionals, until we realized we could count on people that had more experience. And we have in Brazil one of the OWR's project institutions, AUCA, and then we could have their help. I would say that these requests that were done by the environmental agency can be considered the assessment phase shown by Hugo on the view he presented to us. And it's not easy to do this assessment. There are many information to be collected or to be organized. We didn't have time to collect data, but we could organize the data that was available. And this process was interesting. It was done not by Petrobras, it was done by the Brazilian Petroleum Institute, who signed an agreement with environmental agents for elaboration of the Brazilian wildlife mapping plan, which could be used by any operator that is associated to the Brazilian Petroleum Institute. It was not only for Petrobras, we use it a lot, but all the other companies who work or produce in Brazil can assess it. This methodology was developed by two companies that were contracted by the Brazilian Institute Petroleum, AUCA and Richard Bryans, and they presented this methodology on two events. One of them on 2015, that was the effects of oil and on wildlife conference, and later on 2017 on the IOSC, and it's available on this address if there is some interest. In English, it's called Environmental Mapping for Emergency Response at Sea. It's also available on the internet in English, and it organized all the information about the vulnerable species and areas used by these species that should be protected, that should be some concern about protecting these areas. This is again the South America map, and this region is the Brazil map, and these areas are the places where the information was organized. This was very important then, to the next steps. And after doing the planning phase, we had to start the resourcing phase, and on the second phase on this wheel, because we had to identify the places where the animals could be managed, rehabilitated. And we had some structures function, but we in fact organized an oiled wildlife care network, and that's what I'm going to explain next. And this was done in the same time that we had to implement a monitoring program about stranded animals. It was called Santos Basin Stranded Animals Monitoring Program because it was required for on the license process for the Petrobras activities at this region. This monitoring program was required on the year of 2014 and was focused on birds, turtles, and marine mammals found about within 2,000 kilometers of the Santos Basin coastline. This monitoring includes search on the beach and rescue, collect animals data, and veterinary care of those which are sick or dead. On these pictures, I'm showing some of the animals that were really identified during the monitoring program. It started on the September 2015. We have now six years of implementation, and we had registered more than 100,000 animals during this period. About 10% of them were alive and went to the rehabilitation facilities, and about 2% of these alive animals could be rehabilitated and then released again to nature. And that's what I'm showing on this picture, some penguins that were released after being rehabilitated. The other animals, the dead ones, they are analyzed, and we try to discover the reason why they died. It's a kind of monitoring program to identify if there are impacts caused by the oil and gas activities done on this region. And the veterinary care was built by Petrobras and are still kept by Petrobras. There are 17 facilities only on this region that that was structured to the Santos Basin, 2,000 kilometers, I have said before, where the monitoring program is done. Then these 17 facilities, they are distributed, and 13 of them can be used to rehabilitate oil wildlife on an oil spill response. I have said before, Petrobras operates on other basins, and then we have other 3 stranded animals monitoring programs. The red line shows the Santos Basin that I have talked just before. The yellow line shows Espírito Santo and Campos Basin monitoring program, and then there is another on the northeast of Brazil, yellow line, pink line, and finally the purple line shows the 4th monitoring program located on Potiguar Basin. In total, we have nowadays 24 facilities available to be used on an oil spill, able to participate on the rehabilitation process from these groups: birds, turtle, and marine mammals, including the cetaceans, the sirenians, and the pinnipeds. All these 24 facilities and the professionals that are involved on the monitoring program compose our Tier 1 and we have other facilities that could increase the capacity. We have 5 mobile units located in the Brazilian region, and they can be moved by airplane to the place it's needed, and we can increase our tier 1 with professionals that can work in all territory. And finally, if necessary, we count on the OSRL service level agreement, and we think this is what's necessary by now to have a complete wildlife response. We have still some work to be done, some challenges, and I would say one of them is the preparedness and response on equatorial margin, that is on the north of Brazil, a sensitive area with high biodiversity. Another challenge is the sharing costs of wildlife care network maintenance. And finally, to improve the knowledge and the experience on the application of secondary response techniques on oil response. I think that's what I wanted to share with you, and I am able and hope to answer your questions if there is some. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Barbara and Chidem, Nasir and Hugo, for really excellent presentations, just covering some really great work over years to really embed this good practice approach. So thank you all very much for sharing all of that. We intentionally left some time for questions and discussion. I think hopefully there are some really thought-provoking elements of some of the things that were shared today. So if you would like to ask a question, you have 2 options. Either you can just post it in the chat, or alternatively, if you'd like to ask it verbally, just click on the raise your hand icon at the top of your screen, and we'll try to get to you to have you ask your question to the presenters. So feel free to have a think and just sort of share your thoughts on that. I'll maybe ask the presenters to all put your cameras on for this. And just while we are thinking about questions, I'll maybe just kick things off. In fact, I can already see a question coming in. So let me just see. That's Amanda. So Amanda, if you want to unmute and just ask your question and let us know if it's directed at somebody in particular.
Yes, thank you. It's directed at, I'm not sure I know how to pronounce her name, GM, I think, the second last speaker.
Sorry. Yeah. Hello.
Okay. So your presentation was very thought-provoking for me. I'm from Uganda, and part of the project that's being developed is located within a national park. One of the most visited, actually, the largest and one of the most visited in the country. So lots of wildlife. And my question is, did you have any interference during your operations with, say, the regulators in your country who are responsible for wildlife? Were they helpful? How did you manage to? How did you work around engaging them, getting them involved in the process? I'm just thinking how we'll do it on our part.
Very, very fair question, and this is a very important question. That is why I said we need to ask to each other, talk to each other to just benefit from our experiences. As I said during my presentation, that part was the challenging part. We were thinking, because engaging with the government and non-governmental organizations, yes, what we did at the beginning, we first of all we went to government officials, regulators. Actually, we explained them what we were planning to do, why, how, and we asked them what they think and what is the capability in country, and we tried to get them actually own this as well as their own project, because without their support, without their involvement, it is, to me, it doesn't make sense. It's not easy to build this such capacity. So first of all, we went them, introduced ourselves, and explained their project, the aim, target, etc., and asked for their opinion. Ask what they would do if they were us, and what they would expect from us in line with their legislative requirements. And they were also very cooperative and excited to help and support. They supported this project very well, I should say. So they opened the door to us to get in. Without their consent in Azerbaijan, it is nearly impossible to get in. I don't know if that answers your question. We can talk more.
No, thank you. It's very helpful. Thanks a lot. I don't know if the
Welcome.
sorry, the last speaker, Barbara. Yes, I don't know if Barbara also has if Barbara has a different answer just in terms of how it was approached. But thank you very much. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. That's a great question. Barbara, yeah, do you want to comment?
Yes, I was thinking while Sigden was answering you, Amanda. We had established some requirements done by the environmental agency when we started, and this was the kind of guidelines. We didn't have at that time, 2012, 2013, the IPCA guideline that was released on 2014, but we had other instructions and we followed it, but we had the NGOs organizations that already worked with the animals, rehabilitating them, and we worked a lot with them. In fact, they are the ones who does the work, the stranded animals monitoring program, and who work on the rehabilitation centers. And yes, we talked with those who already know how to do the answer. I think it's very important. There are different ways to be with them, but I think it's very important to involve those who already are doing some kind of fauna monitoring or fauna rehabilitation. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And yeah, really great question. So there you're talking about the engagement with external stakeholders and government and non-governmental. Nasir, just to maybe follow up in terms of a question that's maybe more about the internal engagement piece of this. So what has been that process for you, getting that corporate level support from within Preparedness to initiate the wildlife planning efforts over the last few years? How has that been? Any lessons learned from that?
Yeah, based on our experience, previously we don't actually have any exposure in the areas. but we do have specific departments doing biodiversity studies, but unfortunately it was not expanded to wildlife aspect of it. So the way that we did was we call all of our subject matters, get them to sit down together and have a common understanding what is our goal that we're trying to achieve, and we're actually managed to do that, and actually driven the initiative from within the organization. And by the time we brought that to our management, based on this agreement, the management has really decided, yeah, you can proceed with this, provided that the SME, the subject matter experts, are aligned with our expectations. So yeah, that is our experience.
Great, thank you very much. And yeah, we have a question in the chat from Richard. Question 1, besides the challenges in dealing with the governments, are there other challenges from your experiences? So maybe we'll start there. Hugo, would you like to comment on that first question at all?
Well, I mean, the government is a challenge in itself, and often it's not one government. Often you're dealing with various ministries because there are so many aspects of a wildlife response. So it would include the maritime responsible authorities, the coastal authorities, animal welfare authorities, game and hunting. So there's a whole array of them, and so that's one piece that is a challenge in itself. The other challenges may be that there's maybe the lack of information about what kind of wildlife is actually in the area. So scientific research that actually indicates how many species are where in what season might be lacking. So at most you might see and look into your marine area or your coastal area, and there might be some information available, maybe from international resources, but to be very precise in what exactly your risks are could be a challenge as well. So it's very important there to tap into scientific resources, and there are often scientists in any country that are doing some level of research. Bring those together. So that's the science part. Challenges may include also responders, because there might be all kind of NGOs maybe studying or dealing with wildlife in general or conservation, but there might be no organization that has really experience with dealing with the animals hands-on, capturing them, rehabilitating them. So those are amongst various different challenges that you may need to look into. So it really depends where you are, what you're facing, and I think it's really to bring resources together. I mean, there were various examples of workshops to be held. Just to throw it into the middle, if there are many authorities available for such a workshop, or scientists, you can just ask, like, okay, we want to do this. Who has the access to resources, information, etc., to do that first scan? And so maybe that's where I can stop for answering this.
That's great, Hugo, and so thank you. Yeah, actually, I was going to come to you actually now for this second part, but yeah, feel free to add thoughts to that first question. But Hugo was talking about the challenges of planning for different species, and do you need specific species specialists in the response teams? So perhaps I could ask you that, but also to ask how has that worked with also your involvement of international experts, and how has that in your experience also supported that? So yeah, over to you.
So yeah, okay, maybe mixed answer for this. Just wanted to share for species, as Hugo said, it is very important to know your area, to know what you may, if that bad day comes, hope not, but if that comes, what you're going to impact. So it is the main part of this project. So what we did in Azerbaijan, in Georgia and Turkey as well, we did another. We had another project for environmental and socioeconomic sensitivity maps. We developing those maps, and those are not only maps. These it's a full package with databases, maps, all the information about the species and their distribution, concentration, etc. So that was our starting point actually for the planning. And for that project, defining the species, impacts, concentration, that part, we also, as I mentioned during my presentation, we got support from international resources. So during that time, International Bird Rescue, Tri-State, IUCA, those organizations and some others, they supported us on these projects a lot, really. So they helped us to develop the project properly in line with the international best practices and international standards. So yes, for the response teams, it is important to have relevant people in the team. That is why in the pool we don't have only names. We have their professional areas, their experiences. So if something happens and we may need those experts on at site, we just pick the experts. If we have the impact on seals, we would pick the experts on seals, not the birds. So the pool has all this information. I don't know if this answers your question or not. Just feel free to add comment. I don't remember the name. Richard.
Yeah, Richard. Yeah, Richard, if you want any more clarification, feel free to add in the chat. But no, thank you. And I thought those were really great points. And we do have a couple more minutes. If there's one more question in the audience, if there's somebody that has one more question, feel free to ask away.
I would say thank you very much for answering my questions. I think they have been exhaustive answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. Just while we're waiting here, Hugo, let me ask you this question, because you talked about that important transition from having the plan on paper to actually moving into that resourcing. And I think it's fair to say that transition point is a challenging one, and often one where there can sort of be some potential of getting stuck and not being able to move into that multi-year aspect. So yeah, how can operators help to ensure that momentum is maintained rather than lost at that point? I just wondered if you have any thoughts to share on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question, and we've seen it many times in the past where entities, could also be governments, are interested to develop a plan. So they go through that first 3 steps. And then once the plan is written, it's still a plan on paper, as I said, and then the project stops, and often there's no follow-up. I think it's often a question of funding. It is also that the plan in itself becomes a surprise also to the management of a company or of a entity. And they then have to discuss, like, what are we going to do? And that process can take quite a while. And as I said, there's a lot of turnover of people, and then somehow it's getting lost. And then there's only a plan on paper in the end. To face that is actually to let the plan developing go hand in hand with exercises. Especially exercises can be very engaging, even something that happens in the field or a tabletop or a workshop combined with the tabletop. It is so enriching for people to actually see it. And it's that commitment that maybe persons that are attending these events could have, but it is transitioning that into the management levels of organizations to make sure that what individuals on the work floor are identifying is actually transitioned into a funding base. There must be, the program costs money. That's fair, and it's that management should realize that there is some outstanding risks there, and as long as they don't see it or don't feel it, it won't happen. But it is the combination of making it visible by having those events really showing what's at stake. That really helps.
Great, thank you, Hugo. I did see one last question in the chat. We'll have to be very, very quick with this one. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on this. So Samuel asks, apart from oil spills, have you done any studies on the impact of magnetic fields on wildlife, especially aquatic animals? And if yes, how can such impacts be managed? Is that something that anybody can or would like to comment on? If not, we might have to have a look into that and come back to you. But any thoughts from anyone?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. Is it in general magnetic fields, or is it there's also some activities trying to use magnetic powder to get oil off feathers? I don't know if that is the question, but magnetic field, if it is the Earth magnetic field, and what changes in that would do with animals. The only thing I can say there is that we are talking about wildlife response, but these kind of networks, this kind of knowledge about how to deal with, I would say, marine wildlife emergencies is really useful, because you could have, other events that are causing that animals massively are stranding on the coast, and having a wildlife response plan probably gives you the clues how to deal with those other events as well. And that also means that looking at the marine environment and also talking with governments, it's always useful to place that on the radar as well, that we are not talking about wildlife response, but marine responses in general. Think container vessels that are having problems. We've seen that recently as well, several times, and you would have your coast full of rubbish. That also requires, like, how do you deal with that? And that's often is the same how you would like to get animals from your shore. You need to organize that. So that's maybe an answer in general.
Great, Hugo. Yeah, thank you very much. So that's a really excellent point to finish on here. So with that, I just wanted to mention a few closing remarks and resources to everybody here. I think the first one obviously is to make sure, if you don't already have access to these, to access these good practice guidance documents that have been referenced today. They've been published by IPICA and they're available freely at the IPICA website. So there's two there on wildlife response, one on preparedness, one on some of the sort of technical aspects of protection and rehabilitation of wildlife. CLAM maintains a freely available database of country wildlife response profiles. Those are an excellent starting point as well in terms of understanding crucial information on preparedness levels in a particular country. So absolutely, worth referencing. The OSRL ReadyCheck tool, which is also freely available on the OSRL website, now includes some specific questions on wildlife preparedness. So if you're looking to just sort of do a first check, then I would recommend doing that, having a look under the tools section of the OSRL website. And every quarter we hold a meeting called the Wildlife Preparedness and Response Community of Practice. It's really a meeting to share experiences and lessons learned across our members and across other key stakeholders. All of the presenters today attend those meetings. I think they would also say and echo that it's been a very helpful forum. It's chaired by Rich Davey from ExxonMobil and Anne-Laure Szymanski from Equinor. If you're interested in participating, our next meeting is in December. You can contact me and I'll make sure you're added to the list. It's a very informal group, but similarly to today, it's really about sharing expertise and helping to build momentum. And lastly, if you're interested in other topics to do with wildlife response preparedness, we certainly love to hear from you. Let us know what you are interested in, what your needs are, and we can look at some topics to include next year. So please do get in touch on that as well. And so finally, all that's left really is to say a huge thank you to all the presenters today, to Hugo, to Nasir, to Chidem, and to Barbara for sharing your incredible experiences and knowledge, really spanning the globe really in terms of the work that's being carried out. Wish you all the best with your ongoing programs. And of course, thank you to everybody who attended today. And if you have any questions, you're very welcome to be in touch. And we'll make sure to share this recording with you all. But thank you for now and see you next time.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yep.